About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
Hi there. Welcome to Noetic Moments, where we explore the field of research that discovers what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be very different if we understood it better. I'm Ruth Miller, your host, and through this series of programs, I'm sharing some of the history, explaining some of the ideas and experiments, and introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. Now, if you did catch any earlier shows, you may remember that we generally have two ways of thinking about consciousness. In the world of medicine and psychology, we talk about whether you're aware, awake, and know what's going on. But in the world of Noetics, as it has emerged over the past 100 years, consciousness is much more. It's the processes and products of mind, both in our awareness and outside of it. It's also those profound human experiences that we sometimes have. And ultimately, Noetics can be called the science of what connects us all. Now, so far in this series, we've been exploring the history of research around what the mind is and how it works. I've talked about Sigmund Freud, who opened the door to a scientific understanding of the mind in the early 1900s, and then Carl Jung and his ideas about how our individual consciousness must be understood as part of what he called the collective consciousness, or the collective unconscious. I introduced Charles Tart's ideas of states of consciousness, each with its own set of physiological, emotional, and mental characteristics. And then we met Julian Jaynes, who related consciousness to the separation of right and left hemispheres of our brain. I've introduced some of the field models of mind developed by Sheldrake, Levine, and others to help us understand how mind seems to not be limited to the brain. And then, of course, we began to consider how quantum mechanics relates to the study of mind, thought, and consciousness as a whole, with David Bohm's ideas on the nature of thought. If you're curious about any of those topics, you can catch up on them on the KXCR.net archives or on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll find links to the clips I include in the show, as well as to books and authors that I mention as we go along. Today, we're continuing our exploration of quantum processes and how they relate to our consciousness through the work of a remarkable woman, Dana Zohar. In the preface of her 1990 book, The Quantum Self, Human Nature and Consciousness Defined by the New Physics, Dana shares with us a little bit about her experience. She says, "I first discovered quantum theory at the age of 16. I am certain that early introduction influenced both my life and my way of looking at the implications of what is generally called the new physics. In late adolescence, so many things become uncertain, and one is driven by a tremendous urgency to find answers to life's big questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What is my place in the scheme of things? Why is the world like it is? What does it mean that one day I must die? Where my parents' rather set-piece answers and the simple methodism of my grandparents failed to offer any light, the new physics seemed to hold out to me a kind of poetic vision. The seething equivalence of matter and energy, the flux suggested by the wave-particle duality, the sudden birth and death of particles that I witnessed in the vapor trails of my homemade cloud chamber, and the tantalizing unfixedness reality suggested by Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, all worked like a kind of potion to excite my imagination. She goes on to say, to most people, the world of physics seems a world apart. Its complex mathematical formulas, its apparently unfathomable experimental results appear to bear no relation whatever to the everyday world of common sense experience, no relation to our perceptions or emotions, never mind to the personal and social problems that occupy so much of our lives. And yet physics, like all science, began in the realm of daily experience. And then she goes on. The book, The Quantum Self, was written while she was pregnant. So it's a totally different kind of book than it might have been at any other time in her life, and obviously than any man could ever write. A pregnant woman is no longer isolated, can't be. There is this being, there is this life, and it's something she doesn't have any control over, and yet is part of her and related to her and changing how she lives and how she feels and what she does and says. So a huge part of what influenced Dana Zohar's understanding of quantum physics was the realization that it is true in our daily experience, as it is true at the level of individual quanta, subatomic particles, that we are constantly defined by our relationships, and we are constantly overlapping with other beings and other forms of expression. But there's a whole lot more to what Zohar is telling us. Part of it has to do with those quantum phenomena of entanglement and non-locality, and part of it has to do with the uncertainty that she mentions in the preface. She points out that the universe cannot be seen as a set of steps determined, each one by the past step. She points out that we're talking about probabilities here, what might happen. She goes on to explain through the essential experiments and those well-tested principles that quantum mechanics have proven over and over again. She points out that they lead to a startling conclusion. She leads up to that with the description of single-cell microbes that turn toward food and away from toxins, pointing out that if a single cell can choose, and choice is a function of consciousness, then consciousness does not require a brain. And she goes on, if subatomic particles change their behavior based on the presence or absence of an observer, then subatomic particles, the electrons, protons, neutrons, the photons that are everywhere throughout the universe, are choosing, which is an act of consciousness. Now, this realization led Zohar to the conclusion that consciousness must pervade all matter and energy because they're made up of those subatomic particles and waves, with increasing levels of complexity as the matter-energy system is more complex. So a cell has more ability to choose than an electron. And a multi-cell being has more consciousness than a single-cell being, and human beings have more complex levels of consciousness than any of those others. She calls this view that consciousness is pervading everything Panentheism. It's not pantheism. not the pantheism of a culture that assigns spiritual qualities to different aspects of the world. It's panentheism, the presence of conscious intelligence in every aspect of the universe. So, because everything in the universe is connected, sometimes instantaneously because of quantum entanglement and non-locality, that means no one being is ever separate or isolated. And, as I pointed out earlier, therefore, everyone and everything can only be defined in terms of its or his or her relationships. At the end of the book, she says, the quantum worldview transcends the dichotomy between the individual and relationship by showing us that people can only be the individuals they are within a context. I am my relationships. My relationships to the sub-selves within my own self, my past and my future, my relationships to others, and my relationships to the world at large. I am I, uniquely myself, because I am an utterly unique pattern of relationship. For the quantum self, neither individuality nor relationship is primary, because both arise simultaneously and with equal weight from the quantum substrate. Similarly, the quantum worldview transcends the dichotomy between human culture and nature, and indeed imposes the constraint of the natural upon the ultimate success of the cultural. The physics of consciousness that gives rise to the world of culture, to art, ideas, values, moralities, and even religions, is the same physics that gives us the world of nature. In both cases, it is a physics driven by the need to maintain and increase ordered coherence in free response to the environment. I'm going to let you hear a little bit about this in one of her interviews.
What I am saying is the old physics is not relevant to the climate in which business must operate today, and that now quantum physics gives us a better model. Quantum physics writ large is about uncertainty, unpredictability, an inability to control the system from without, but rather to take advantage of the self-organization of the system. And you don't control a quantum system. If you do so, you dampen down its creativity. So quantum strategy is not think, we'll do this, and this is how we'll do it. It's thinking we might do this, we might do that, we might do the other, i.e. you develop a scenario of possible strategies. The most likely one may be the one that happens, but you're ready if the most unlikely one, or even someone you haven't considered, happens. The role of the leader in quantum companies, or quantum societies for that matter, any kind of organization of human beings, is to set the values, have the vision for what the system is aspiring to or the company is aspiring to motivate the people, to inspire them, and especially to be active in creating a culture in which this kind of self-organization thrives. A quantum leader, indeed I think all of us in our lives are servants. We're servants of the unfolding reality. Quantum physics tells us that even in the universe, conscious systems are co-creators of what reality unfolds. The whole quantum dimension of reality is a world of potentiality and possibility. It is conscious creatures and relationships that form, that make those possibilities realities. So which possibilities in the quantum sea, as it were, become waves that affect things is up to us. The questions that we ask, the decisions that we make. So all of us in the quantum world must learn to reflect more, ask better questions, and learn to think about what we're doing.
So Dana Zohar's work, both individually and with her psychiatrist husband, has led to the idea of SQ, spiritual intelligence, as a necessary attribute for leaders and managers in all kinds of positions. She's one of the first people to recognize that this new physics means a new way of doing everything. It means that our consciousness is part of something far greater than anything we had any realization of. Her panentheism and Jung's collective unconscious are all related, universal, of the universe, the fabric of waves and particles and information that make up the all that is. She helps us to see that we need new ways of making decisions, and we'll explore all of that further as we continue this series. All right, well, it's time to look at a book other than Zohar's this week. And because she brought up this term theism, as in panentheism, I figured it would probably be a good idea to go back and take a look at Paul Davies' book from 1984 called God and the New Physics. Paul Davies has been teaching in American universities and also has worked in Australia and Great Britain over several decades. And he put together this book, God and the New Physics, Science and Religion in a Changing World, because he says there have been so many questions that come up, deep questions of existence, he says. And as you will recall, Zohar was suggesting the same thing. For the first time, he says in his preface, a unified description of all creation could be within our grasp. No scientific problem is more fundamental or more daunting than the puzzle of how the universe came into being. Quantum physics seems to provide a loophole to the age-old assumption that you can't get something for nothing. Physicists are now talking about the self-creating universe, a cosmos that comes into existence spontaneously. But he points out this is not a book about religion. He makes no attempt, he says, to discuss religious experiences or questions of morality, and this is not a science book. It is a book about science and its wider implications. His very first page, Science and Religion represent two great systems of human thought. And that gets back to our very first episode where we talked about the Cartesian split, the idea that the church would be responsible for things related to mind and thought and spirit and would let others explore the nature of the world, the planets, and the body without burning them at the stake because they disagreed with church teachings. So one of the things that Davies says is the world's major religions founded on received wisdom and dogma are rooted in the past and do not cope easily with changing times. Science, then, has invaded our lives, our language, and our religions, but not at the intellectual level. The vast majority of people do not understand scientific principles, nor are they interested. Science remains a sort of witchcraft, its practitioners regarded with a mixture of awe and suspicion. We live in a world that, he says, in spite of appearances, is still fundamentally religious. So his point is that there is this incredibly wonderful new physics which has led to all kinds of things that we experienced as technology, from smartphones and computers to new discoveries in the way the body works, the principles of which have no meaning to most of the folks on the planet. His chapters are Science and Religion in a Changing World, Did God Create the Universe? Why is there a universe? What is life? Mind and soul, the self, the quantum factor, time, free will and determinism, the fundamental structure of matter, accident or design, black holes, cosmic chaos, miracles, the end of the universe. Is the universe a free lunch? And finally, the physicist's conception of nature. So he's really giving us an overview of the science from the perspective of someone who understands the theory. He's written a textbook on quantum mechanics, but he's also giving us an overview of how the culture has responded to and been affected by the science through the various technologies. So he talks about the various kinds of things that religion requires and how science may address some of the questions and the mysteries. So I'm back on page 209. There are many mysteries about the natural world that would be readily explained by postulating a natural deity. The origin of galaxies, for example, has no satisfactory explanation at present. The origin of life is another baffling puzzle. But we can conceive of both these systems being deliberately engineered by an intelligent superbeing without any violation of the laws of physics. However, such an explanation may fall into the old trap of attributing to God anything that happens to be beyond the scope of today's scientific understanding. Religious adherents have learned to their cost how perilous it is to point to a phenomenon and say that is evidence of God's work, only to find that scientific advances subsequently provide another adequate explanation. Nevertheless, a natural, as opposed to a supernatural God, fares better in the face of this argument. The hypothesis that a natural God created life within the laws of physics is at least known to be possible and consistent with our scientific understanding of the physical world. So God and the New Physics by Paul Davies walks that very narrow, very treacherous line between religion and science, and helps us to understand how it is that a scientist who is skeptical of the supernatural will continue to explore and discover and aim for natural explanations for all of the phenomena and all of the mysteries of life. And if we go back to the ideas that we've been talking about in the last couple of weeks of quantum bases for consciousness and the presence of intelligence throughout all that is, then maybe it's not so much to suggest that there is God in and through all that is. That was one of many possible books to be looking at, and we will be looking at many more, written on aspects of consciousness, aspects of how quantum physics and mind and thought relate, and we'll try to keep up with new titles as they come out. If you know of a book or video you'd like me to address, send an email to me, ruth@noeticmoments.org, and I will take a look at it. All right. Well, that music tells us that it's time to look at something that's going on now in our lives and in our world. In the past few weeks, we've talked about everything from the collective consciousness and the impact of COVID. We've talked about ascension. We've talked about how we can set intention effectively. Consciousness and Noetics in particular give us some marvelous, marvelous frameworks to be thinking about how we can live our life. In the interview with Dana Zohar that we listened to earlier, she was talking about how we can apply the ideas of uncertainty and potential possibilities, emerging realities in the management of organizations, communities, and families, and even our own life. She makes the point, and it's a very valid point, it's the one I've been using as a futurist, that we need to explore not a particular intention or a particular plan for how we're going to move forward, but we need to be aware that several possible scenarios may be unfolding here, and we won't know exactly which one it is until we're well into it. So we need to be prepared, or at least open to the possibility that things will not go quite as our expectations have led us to believe they will. So if you're thinking about, say, a vacation or a move or shifting from one stage in your life, being single to being married, or being in one location or another, you might want to look at this, recognizing that we want to be looking at possibilities for the future, even probabilities for the future, and assessing which are most likely to happen and be prepared for all of them. Yep, all of them. The way I frame that is there are several directions things can go to pieces, and there are several directions they can work out wonderfully. And at the extremes, everything goes really, really, really awfully physically, or everything goes really, really, really awfully emotionally. And in the middle, everything goes very evenly and kind of unfolds, and there's some surprises, but not so many. And then at the other realm of extremes, everything goes incredibly much better than I could possibly have imagined. That's my goal, right? That's all of our goal. So, as you're thinking about a change in direction or the next stage in your life, consider the possibilities, a range of possibilities. Consider what might unfold. Look at what your past experiences have been. And rather than go, oh, no, not that, that's actually putting more energy into it, isn't it? Go, well, in the off chance that that were to occur, I think I'll probably do this instead. But be prepared for a mix. All right. Well, that's it for today's show. The next time we get together, we'll explore another explanation of consciousness. We're going to integrate these quantum ideas with Peter Russell's suggestion that we are now part of, and the planet may well be described as, an electronic global brain. And we're out of time for today. But remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there's a list of the titles and other resources we refer to on the show, along with archived past shows, and there are links to all of the resources that you may want to follow up on. And remember, there's a form on there that you can use if you can't remember the email address, and you can send me your comments and questions, which I will do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments at KXCR Community Radio, 90.7 FM in Florence, Oregon. And have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic Sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.